Don't miss Ensemble for These Times' upcoming concert, Mujeres Ahora, on May 9th at the Community Music Center, presented as part of the San Francisco International Arts Festival. For more information, go to www.e4tt.org.
Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for These Times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Zanaida Robles, who we spoke to in January 2024. Who or what are your mentors and influences?
I think my dad.
I got that.
Both my parents, but my dad, especially, is an influence. I would like to name at different stages of life. There was, when I was taking piano lessons, there was this place called Wilson's Music in Carson, and Lola Wilson was the owner.
Mm-hmm.
Her support was actually really important. I don't talk about her very much because it was a long time ago and she's since passed away. But I just wanted to say that because I have an opportunity to lift that up.
Mm-hmm.
And without those piano lessons, that was really important in the time when in my youth, my home situation, we moved around a little bit. And there were some difficulties in our family. And so piano lessons at Wilson's with Wilson's Music was really important to me, and keeping me grounded and focused and centered, and feeling like I had something to offer and I had support. In high school, the LA County High School for the Arts, just having that as a place to kind of incubate and grow, and then and so that's important to mention as an influence overall. And then some mentors that came out of my experience once I got to college. I'd say, well, Jonathan Talberg from Cal State Long Beach. He was also my teacher at LOXA for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Smith at Cal State Northridge, who was the reason why I'm doing choral music. And James Walker at All Saints Church, Pasadena, who was, I learned more about choral music from James Walker at church than I did in years of music school study, just repertoire, learning about choral repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
I got that from that program and from James Walker. And I would also I didn't realize what I was getting, but Lynn Bielefeld at Cal State. Before I even knew anything about, I didn't know anything about conducting. I had no idea. I thought I was going to be an opera singer or a jazz singer or something. But Lynn Bielefeld at Cal State Long Beach, her gesture was so beautiful. That got into me, and I will never forget my experience working with Lynn Bielefeld. That's a really important name at Cal State Long Beach. Yeah. And John Alexander just knows everything out of California and Pacific Chorale. So my time at Pacific Chorale was really important too. Lots of people obviously came together to support me. So I've been very, very fortunate.
Sounds like it. Yeah. What are you currently listening to or reading? Any kind of genre, whatever?
Well, not poetry right now.
Yeah, right.
I'm taking a break. I'm taking a little break from poetry. I have a couple of books of poetry that I keep by my bedside. And I listen to K-Jazz, and I listen to the jazz radio station, K-Jazz, and the classical radio station, KUSC. That's pretty much all I listen to on the radio. That's not true. I also listen to Coast, and I listen to pop because I want to stay current, because I teach high school. So I got to know what's out there, right? And I listen to a lot of things. I listen to everything. Also, I guess that's pretty much it. I'm doing most of my listening on radio when I'm driving in, and that's because that's all I can. When I'm driving, I can't multitask, so I can just listen, so. But yeah, I listen to a lot of radio. And then when I'm not driving, I'm too busy doing everything. I can't sit down long enough to really deeply listen to something. That's a little bit hard for me these days.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I know a lot of people, including me, who can't really have music in the background for anything except maybe cooking or something, where and driving, obviously, but for almost anything else, background music is not background
Yeah.
for most
Yeah,
of
no,
us.
that's well, it depends on the style for me. If it's class, I cannot listen to classical music in the background at all.
It's too
No.
present. Yeah.
Then once it's classical music, I'm sitting down and I'm analyzing and I'm taking notes and I'm stealing material and like I'm composing and yeah. And similar with jazz, also I think a lot about, I'm thinking about style. I'm trying to identify if it's not immediately clear who the maybe I just turn the radio station on and it's jazz and I'm saying, who's that artist? Is that Miles Davis sound? Is that,
Yeah.
Or is that a different trumpet player? Is that, sax player? Where are they from? What side of the, is this East Coast, West Coast? Like, all of these things happening, right? So same. But if it's like, if I'm just kind of like, I need a mood, then I'll pop in usually something super familiar that I don't have to think about.
Right. That doesn't engage your
so
brain.
Like for me, it's like,
Mhm.
what was I listening to when I was in middle school? I was listening to Janet Jackson, or Mariah Carey. Honestly, I was listening to Whitney Houston. I was listening to those artists. So I can pop that in and just let it be in the background and get a vibe going. I can do that.
That works. You're a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in music, both in terms of education and performance. Can you talk about your work in that realm? Are there resources you'd recommend for those wishing to join the cause?
This is a little bit of a tough question, just because I'm in a place now where I remain a very strong advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion in education and performance.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not actively doing like that work. And any just I that work is difficult, especially as a person, as a Black woman.
Yeah.
There's and especially coming through the years, the previous presidential administration and COVID and all of that. There was a lot. I felt a lot of pressure internally and externally.
Yeah.
To do that work, because I felt like there was such a huge need. Now I feel like there are lots of organizations, institutions, and individuals who have taken up that mantle, and I no longer feel like I feel like I did what I needed to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and so I guess there's maybe two thoughts about that. One is, in some ways we can never let up. We have to be vigilant. I'm vigilant, and I'm still working in institutions where that is an issue we are continuing to work on.
Good. Yeah.
And it's all kinds of manifestations of diversity and inclusion, from the institutional to the individual. There's so many different ways to look at those issues. We have to be vigilant about all of them. But also, there are so many resources now. There's so many organizations, and I think I'm not every organization, but most arts organizations, performing arts organizations have some kind of cultural competency where they're doing that work or have done that work.
Right. Right.
And I don't, and so in a way we're moving towards being, it can't be just, you don't just you can't just put a sticker and say, diversity, equity, inclusion certified. It's like, we're living it now. We're in the you're not just stamping anymore. We're living it now.
Yeah.
And I think that has given me a little bit of peace to say, I don't have to represent what I used to have to, I feel like I had to represent, whether I really had to or not, I don't know. But now I feel there's a bit more freedom. There's a bit more space. We're a bit further removed from that tense intense time of hyper focus on it. Thankfully, there's been so much progress and so much work that put towards diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access, all of those elements. And there are so many others that, you know, have done so much work and research and study and scholarship on this. You know, I wouldn't even call myself, you know, I've never been an expert, and I'm definitely, you know, at this point, I'm watching others ascend and soar in this work, doing greater things and more than I could have ever imagined doing. And I'm very grateful for that.
Right. So it's no longer a case of, if not I, who will?
Yeah.
And so you don't have to carry the torch because so many people are running with it.
Exactly. And they're really, and I'm inspired by what I've seen. I mean, you know, there's a lot of, there are all kinds of people that come to mind in organizations and things like that, you know, but there's so many, like, you, wherever you are in whatever, you know, sphere of the country you're in or the world that you're in, we have people in our midst now that are doing that work, and that makes me feel great.
You know, it does. It really does. Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Zanaida Robles, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button, and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times, and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts, and tune in next week for Good Measure.